It was a bitterly cold winter morning, the kind where the frost bites through even the thickest coat. The road was empty, shrouded in mist, and silence pressed heavy against the snow-covered earth. Imagine driving through that stillness. When something catches your eye, a faint silhouette on the side of the road, a mother dog trembling against the icy wind, shielding her 4 fragile puppies abandoned alone and barely clinging to life. Would you stop? Or would you keep driving? Telling yourself it's not your problem for John Miller, a lonely trucker in his red Peterbilt. This choice seemed simple until his late wife's words echoed through his mind. Sometimes angels appear in places you least expect. But what if this angel led him to something far darker? The fog was thick that morning, thicker than John Miller had seen in months. It hung in heavy sheets, swallowing the headlights of his red Peterbilt truck as it hummed steadily down into State 95. The world outside felt still wrapped in a ghostly shroud of cold silence. John adjusted his grip on the steering wheel, his calloused fingers tightening out of habit. The cab was warm, but even so, he shivered slightly. Maybe it was the weather. Maybe it was something else. It was always in these quiet hours that he felt the weight of loneliness the most. His wife, Catherine, had loved mornings like these. God's hour, she'd called them, when the world was quiet and waiting for miracles. John didn't believe in miracles anymore. The clock on the dashboard blinked 6:14 a.m. He had a delivery to make in Portland, and he was already on a tight schedule. He'd learned long ago that the road didn't wait for anyone. Life didn't wait for anyone either. And then he saw it. At first it was just a she-shadow, something barely there on the edge of the road. John squinted, leaning forward, but the fog made it impossible to see clearly. Trash. Probably he'd seen plenty of that before. Torn bags, broken furniture, sometimes even deer carcasses. You drove long enough, nothing surprised you. Not my problem, he muttered, shaking his head. But as his truck rumbled closer, his headlights caught it. A pale, trembling shape. It wasn't trash. It wasn't a deer. John's heart kicked up a beat. He eased his foot off the gas, the truck groaning softly. As it slowed, the silhouette took shape. A dog. A living dog, Jonk, jaw clenched. Damn it, he muttered under his breath. His hands hovered over the steering wheel. A dog on the side of the road wasn't his problem. He had deadlines to meet. The trucking company didn't care about excuses. He could already hear his boss's voice in his head. You're late again. Miller clock doesn't stop ticking just because you want to play hero. The truck rolled past. John glanced in the side mirror, a streak of guilt hitting him like a slap. The dog was curled in the snow, so still it looked almost lifeless. Something small and fragile moved beside her. No multiple somethings. Puppies, he swore under his breath and gripped the wheel tighter. Keep driving, John, he muttered. It's not your problem. But the thought wouldn't leave him. Catherine's voice, soft and familiar, rose in his memory. Sometimes angels appear in the most unexpected places. He groaned, the sound echoing in the empty cab. His eyes flicked back to the road. He had a choice to make. Keep moving. Meet his deadline and pretend he'd never seen anything, or stop and risk falling behind, risk everything for a stray dog and her cubs. His stomach twisted. What are you doing, John? He said aloud, as if arguing with himself. It's not like you can save them all. But he knew himself well enough to know that if he left, he'd see them in his mind for the rest of the day. No, for the rest of his life, he'd see those trembling shapes in the snow. Every time he closed his eyes, the truck hissed as he slammed the brakes. God damn it, JN muttered. He put the truck in neutral, grabbed the flashlight from the glove compartment, and threw open the door. The cold hit him like a wall, sharp and biting against his skin. Snow crunched under his boots as he stepped onto the shoulder of the road. The flashlight beam cut through the fog, casting a pale glow on the frozen ground. Hello? He called out, his voice swallowed by the silence. No answer. Only the soft whistle of the wind and the faint hum of the truck's engine behind him. He swept the beam of light across the snow, and then he saw her. The dog lay curled up, half buried in a drift of snow. Her fur, a once beautiful golden coat, was dirty and damp, matted with frost. Her head lifted weakly, her deep brown eyes locking onto John's. In those eyes he saw everything: fear, exhaustion, And something else, Hope? Jesus, John whispered. Huddled around her were 4 puppies, their tiny golden bodies shivering violently in the cold. They looked barely alive. One of them let out a soft whimper, a sound so weak it barely reached his ears. John knelt down, his knees sinking into the snow. The cold bit through his jeans, but he didn't care. "It's all right, girl," he said softly, holding out a hand. "I'm not going to hurt you." The mother dog didn't move. Her breathing was shallow, her body trembling as if every last ounce of her energy had been spent keeping her pups alive. John's throat tightened. "You're not going to make it out here," he murmured. "None of you will for a moment." He froze again. What the hell was he supposed to do? He couldn't just load a stray dog and 4 puppies into his truck. The cab was no place for animals. And even if he did, what? Then he wasn't a vet. He wasn't a hero. But Catherine's voice came back, soft and persistent. "Sometimes angels appear in the most unexpected places." John exhaled sharply, the decision made. "All right," he muttered. "Come on." He shrugged off his heavy coat and spread it on the snow carefully. He picked up the first puppy, a tiny shivering thing that barely filled his hands, and placed it gently on the coat. The mother let out a weak, protesting whine, but John met her eyes. "I know, girl," he said softly. "I know you don't trust yet, but I'm not leaving you." He gathered the other puppies one by one, wrapping them in the coat to keep them warm. Finally, he turned to the mother dog. She was watching him, her breathing labored but steady. "Come on, girl," John said, patting his leg. She hesitated. "Please," he whispered. "I can't do this without you." As if she understood, the dog staggered to her feet. She swayed slightly but managed to follow him as he led the way back to the truck. Snow fell softly around them, landing in her fur like a blanket of frost. John opened the passenger door and lifted the puppies up first, placing the coat carefully on the seat. Then he turned to the mother. "Up you go," he said, grunting slightly as he lifted her into the cab. She was lighter than he'd expected, far too thin once inside. The dog curled up around her pups, her body trembling less now that the cab's heater blasted warm air. JN climbed back into the driver's seat, slamming the door shut against the cold. He turned to look at her. Her eyes were half closed, but she was watching him still. "You need a name," John murmured, reaching for the gear shift. He thought for a moment, and then he smiled faintly. "Lucy. I'll call you Lucy." The dog blinked slowly, and John swore her eyes softened as the truck rumbled back to life and rolled forward. John felt something shift inside him. He was late. He was off schedule, but for the first time in years, he didn't care. "Sometimes angels appear in the most unexpected places," he said, softly. As the road stretched ahead and the fog began to lift, the small gas station sat on the edge of nowhere, its faded pine tree station sign swaying in the wind. The building was old, with peeling paint and a cracked window that had been scheduled for repair for as long as anyone could remember. It was a place forgotten by most travelers, except for those like John Miller, who knew the quiet stops best. John's red Peterbilt truck rumbled to a halt beside the lone pump, its engine coughing into silence inside the cab. Lucy lay curled up protectively around her 4 trembling puppies, still wrapped in John's heavy coat. The heat blasting from the vents had warmed them, but Lucy's eyes remained where, flicking to JN with every sound. John sat for a moment, staring through the windshield as the early morning fog lifted to reveal the familiar gas station. A sharp knock at the window startled him. "John Miller. What the hell's this now?" It was Sarah Parker, the station attendant, bundled up in a faded green coat and scarf. Her short chestnut hair peeked out from under a knit hat, and her green eyes were bright with curiosity. She'd known John for years, back when he and Catherine would stop by during long hauls. John rolled down the window and sighed, "Morning, Sarah." Her eyes narrowed at the bundle on the passenger seat. "What have you picked up this time?" "You wouldn't believe me if I told you," JN muttered, climbing down from the truck. The cold slapped him again, but it was nothing compared to the icy scene from earlier. He opened the door to the cab and carefully lifted Lucy out first. She was light, too light, and she flinched slightly, though exhaustion kept her from resisting. Sarah's face softened instantly. "Oh my God, is that a dog? She looks half dead, she's not alone," John said. Turning back to retrieve the puppies one by one, he placed the small, trembling bodies into Sarah's waiting arms. Her expression darkened as she cradled them, her breath catching. "Where did you find them, on the side of I-95, John replied gruffly, trying not to show the tightness in his chest in the snow. "You did the right thing bringing them here," Sarah said softly. "I don't know about that," Johann muttered, rubbing a hand over his beard. "They're half frozen, and I don't have a clue what I'm supposed to do with them. Let and get them inside." Sarah turned toward the station's door. "Mike's here. HEK know what to do." Inside, the warmth of the gas station was a stark contrast to the biting cold outside. The building smelled faintly of coffee and motor oil, familiar and comforting in a way only small-town places could be. Mike Brown, the station's resident mechanic, was hunched over a counter covered in tools. When they entered, he was a burly man in his early 50s with grease-stained hands and a permanent scowl that didn't match the kind heart beneath. "What's this?" "This," Mike grumbled, straightening up as Sarah carefully set the puppies down on a blanket. "John found them in the snow." Sarah explained their mother too. Mike's gaze softened as he took in the scene. Jesus, poor things. He knelt down beside the puppies, inspecting each one with hands that were surprisingly gentle for their size. Lucy lay nearby, her tired eyes never leaving her babies. "She's skin and bones," Mike muttered, running his hand over Lucy's fur. "How long do you think she's been out there? Too long?" JN said. He crossed his arms and leaned against the wall, watching something GED at him. Something he couldn't quite place. It was Sarah who noticed it first. "Wait a second." She crouched beside Lucy, brushing back the fur on her neck. "What's this?" "What?" John straightened. "There's something on her collar." Sarah held up the worn leather band, pointing to a small faded mark near the buckle. It looked like a logo, something circular with what might have once been letters inside time, and grime had nearly erased it. Mike squinted at the mark. "Looks like someone owned her." "That's not a stray's collar. Does it mean something?" JN asked. "I don't know," Sarah said slowly, but she hesitated, glancing at the puppies and then at Lucy. "You're not going to like this, John. What this isn't the first time. Last week someone found 2 golden retrievers abandoned near the old bridge south of here. Same breed, same condition, starving and weak, and there was another a week before that, near Route 22. Junk's brow furrowed. "You're saying someone's dumping these dogs?" Sarah nodded grimly. "Looks that way." Mike muttered a curse under his breath, his hands balling into fists. "People like that ought to be locked up." "Yeah, well, something doesn't sit right about it," Sarah said. She reached out and gently stroked Lucy's head, who blinked at her tiredly. "This isn't random. Something's going on." John opened his mouth to reply when the faint rumble of an engine outside made them all freeze. Sarah turned her head sharply toward the window. "Did you hear that?" John pushed away from the wall and stepped closer to the glass outside. Through the thinning fog, he saw a sleek black car idling near the gas pumps. Its dark windows reflected the gray morning light, making it impossible to see inside. The car sat there for a long moment, as though watching them. "Who the hell is that?" Mike muttered, his scowl deepening. The car lingered for a few more seconds before suddenly accelerating, its tires crunching against the gravel. As it sped off down the road, Junk's stomach twisted uneasily. "You know them?" Sarah shook her head. "Never seen that car before." "Yeah, but it's not the first time I've seen one like it," Mike said, his voice low. "There's been a black car hanging around near the shop a couple times this week. Thought it was some lost traveler. But now I'm not so sure." John looked back at Lucy and the puppies. They were still curled up on the blanket, oblivious to the tension in the room. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," Mike said darkly, "that someone doesn't want folks paying attention to those dogs." A heavy silence settled over the room outside. The fog had almost cleared, but the air felt heavier somehow, as though it carried a warning. JN looked at Lucy again, her eyes half closed but still protective of her little ones. He thought of Catherine's voice in his mind, soft but insistent sometimes as angels, appear in the most unexpected places. He wasn't sure if this was about angels anymore, but something told him he was already too deep to turn back. Now the red Peterbilt truck came to a halt in front of Anderson Veterinary Clinic, its engine groaning before falling silent. John Miller climbed out, his breath a mist in the frigid air. He'd driven faster than he had in years, his focus sharp, his heart heavy with dread inside the cab. Lucy stirred, lifting her head weakly, as if she could sense her smallest pup's dire condition. John scooped up the puppy still bundled in his coat and led Lucy carefully into the clinic. The building's green-painted door swung open with a chime, and the warmth inside wrapped around him like a reprieve from the merciless cold. Dr. Anderson J.N. called, his voice rough. From a side room, an older man emerged, white-haired and thin-framed but steady in presence. Dr. Robert Anderson had been the town's vet for as long as John could remember. His sharp blue eyes fell on the bundle in John's arms, and in an instant, his demeanor shifted. "What's going on?" Anderson's voice was calm, but urgent. "Found them on the highway," J.N. said, kneeling to set the puppies down gently on a soft examination table. "The mother is barely holding on, but it's the little one I'm worried about." Dr. Anderson pulled on his gloves, taking no time for pleasantries. He knelt beside the smallest puppy, whose golden fur was barely rising and falling with each shallow breath. His eyes narrowed. "This one's critical," Anderson muttered, adjusting the puppy's position. "Let'n see what we're dealing with." John stood back, his fists clenching and unclenching as the vet examined each puppy in turn. Lucy lay nearby, watching with wide, worried eyes, as if she understood that the life of her pup hung in the balance. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Dr. Anderson moved quickly but carefully, listening to heartbeats, feeling joints, and checking gums for signs of circulation. His frown deepened as he reached the smallest puppy. The vet gently pressed a stethoscope to the tiny rib cage and listened intently. "He's severely hypothermic, dehydrated and weak," Anderson finally said, standing upright. His heart rate slow, and his lungs sound like they're struggling. "It's early pneumonia. Probably from exposure to the cold. He's going to need fluids, antibiotics, and a warming protocol immediately." J.N. swallowed hard. "Will he make it?" Anderson hesitated before answering. "I won't sugarcoat it. He's hanging by a thread. If we get him on a warming mat, start IV fluids and administer oxygen, he has a chance, but we'll need to monitor him overnight, and treatment will need to be aggressive." John rubbed the back of his neck, his mind spinning in the cost. Anderson glanced at him, his tone apologetic but firm. "Stabilizing him alone will run around $800 to $1,000 if he needs oxygen support longer or further antibiotics. It'll go higher for the full treatment. You're looking at $1,500 minimum." John froze, staring down at the tiny puppy, the smallest of Lucy's litter. His breath hitched. He didn't have $1,500. Trucking kept the bills paid, but there was never much left over. His savings were just enough for emergencies, truck repairs, hospital bills if something went wrong. But what was this, if not an emergency? He remembered that conversation weeks ago at the diner, the two men in the booth behind him, whispering about faulty stock and getting rid of what doesn't sell. He hadn't thought anything of it at the time, but now the words clawed at his mind. This puppy. Ben John had already decided his name was Ben, had been left to die like trash, because he was weak, because someone decided he wasn't right. John's jaw tightened, his chest burning with anger and helplessness. Catherine's voice echoed in his mind sometimes.
"Angels appear in the most unexpected places." He took a deep breath, reached into his back pocket, and pulled out his worn leather wallet. Inside was the emergency fund he'd spent months saving. Without hesitation, he handed over a crumpled stack of bills to Dr. Anderson. "Do whatever it takes," J.N. said firmly, his voice low but steady. Dr. Anderson studied him for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then he nodded. "I'll get started right away." The next few hours were a blur. Dr. Anderson worked tirelessly in the back room. He set Ben on a heated veterinary warming mat to raise his core temperature. Gradually, hypothermia could be deadly if treated too quickly. A small catheter was inserted into Ben's leg, allowing warmed IV fluids to drip slowly into his tiny body, rehydrating his weakened system. Oxygen flowed gently through a mask placed over his nose to help his fragile lungs. John sat in the waiting room, his boot tapping against the floor in restless rhythm. Lucy lay at his feet, her head resting on her paws, her tired eyes following every sound coming from the exam room. "He's fighting," Anderson said quietly when he returned, pulling off his gloves. "We've stabilized him for now. The next 24 hours are critical. If he makes it through the night, his odds get better." John nodded stiffly, his throat too tight to speak. He looked down at Lucy. "Hear that, girl? He's a fighter." Lucy lifted her head slightly, her eyes meeting his. It was a silent moment of understanding, a promise that they wouldn't give up. John stayed at the clinic late into the night. He dozed off in the waiting room chair once or twice, but each time he woke with a start, the same image flashing in his mind: the black car, the frost-covered puppies, and that helpless little figure lying still in the snow. At one point, Anderson brought out a thermos of coffee and sat across from John. "You don't see a lot of truck drivers stop for animals," the vet said.
Softly, John shrugged. "Didn't think I'd stop either." He hesitated, looking into the dark swirl of his coffee, but someone left them out there like they were nothing. Dr. Anderson nodded slowly. "You'd be surprised how often it happens. People trying to breed for money, puppy mills, illegal experiments, you name it. And when something doesn't turn out how they want," he trailed off. "Well, you saw it yourself." John stared out the window, his thoughts heavy. "It's disgusting." Anderson paused, his expression thoughtful. "You know it's people like you that give these animals a chance." John didn't answer. He just sipped his coffee and looked down at Lucy, who had drifted into a fitful sleep at his feet as dawn broke over the clinic. Dr. Anderson appeared in the waiting room with a tired but hopeful smile. He made it through the night. "The vet said he's not out of the woods yet, but he's a fighter. I've started him on a round of antibiotics to treat the pneumonia, and the fluids have helped. We'll keep monitoring him, but I think he's got a shot." Relief hit John like a wave, and he sank back into the chair, his breath shaky. "Thank you, Doc." Anderson gave a small smile. "You're welcome, but if he pulls through, it's because of you." John looked down at Lucy, then toward the back room, where little Ben was fighting for his life. "No," he murmured, "it's because of him." Catherine's words echoed one last time in his mind. Sometimes angels appear in the most unexpected places. JN smiled faintly. Maybe she'd been right. All along, the morning sun did little to warm the chill hanging over Pine Tree Station outside. Frost clung stubbornly to the ground, sparkling under the weak light. Inside the small gas station, the hum of an old heater filled the room as John Miller sat hunched at a corner table, nursing his third cup of coffee. His red Peterbilt truck was parked out front, steam rising from its hood like a quiet warning in the icy air. Lucy lay curled at John's feet, her golden fur clean but thin, her body finally able to rest the three healthier puppies swaddled in old blankets, huddled in a box, nearby their small chests rising and falling with rhythmic breaths. Only the smallest one, Ben, was missing. He was still at Dr. Anderson's clinic, fighting for his life. John's mind raced as he stared at the swirling black coffee in his mug. He couldn't shake the feeling that something larger was unfolding, something far worse than a family of dogs left to die. He remembered those men in the diner again, their casual mention of faulty goods, and his gut twisted across the counter. Sarah Parker's voice broke the silence. She was on the phone, speaking quickly but quietly. "No, I'm sure of it. Janet Golden Retrievers, young ones. 2, the collar got a mark on it, faded, but it's there. Yeah, I'll send a picture. You think it's them?" JN glanced up, his eyes narrowing. Sarah hung up the phone with a sigh, her short chestnut hair falling slightly out of place as she pushed the strands back. She grabbed a notebook and walked over to where John sat. What was that about, he asked. Though he had a sinking suspicion, he already knew. Sarah's face was pale with concern as she sat across from him. I called Janet. She works with Lighthouse Rescue Group. They deal with abandoned and abused animals across the county. When I described Lucy and the puppies, she asked me to check for identification. That mark on Lucy's collar, Janet thinks it's linked to a breeding facility called Golden Paws Labs. Golden Paws. Mike Brown, the burly mechanic who had just entered, frowned as he pulled off his gloves. I've heard that name before. Yeah, well, there's a reason for that, Sarah said, flipping through her notes. Golden Paws was shut down last year. The authorities raided their facility after reports of unethical breeding practices, genetic experiments mostly. But when they got there, a lot of the dogs were already gone. Janet says it's like they vanished into thin air. Nobody's been able to figure out what happened to them. JN sat up straighter, his brow furrowing. What do you mean? Genetic experiments. Apparently they were breeding dogs with altered genetics, trying to create some perfect line, Sarah said bitterly. The ones that didn't turn out right, they just got rid of them. John's stomach turned, his mind flashing back to Lucy and her pups huddled in the snow. You're saying Lucy and her litter came from that place? Sarah nodded grimly. It fits the color. Mark the condition they're in, and they're golden retrievers. Janet thinks Golden Paws never really shut down. She says these underground networks don't just disappear. They go quiet for a while, then start up again, somewhere else. The heater kicked on again, rattling softly in the corner, but the room felt colder now. Mike sank into a nearby chair, shaking his head. So what, they dump the ones that don't come out right like trash? Sarah's voice dropped. Looks that way. And if Janet's right, Lucy isn't the first dog they've dumped nearby. John rubbed his face, frustration boiling in his chest. Those bastards, before Sarah could reply. A low rumble outside drew everyone's attention. JN turned his head sharply toward the window. A sleek black car had pulled into the gas station lot, its windows tinted so dark they reflected nothing but the pale morning light. The car sat there, idling its engine, a quiet hum. Who's that, Mike? Muttered, his voice low. John didn't answer. His eyes stayed locked on the car, his instincts screaming that something wasn't right. He stood the legs of his chair, scraping loudly against the floor, and stepped closer to the window. The black car lingered for another moment, just long enough for John to feel the weight of being watched before it suddenly reversed, tires crunching on the frosty gravel, and sped off down the road, disappearing into the fog. They were watching us, Sarah said, her voice shaking slightly. Junk's jaw clenched. They've been watching me, Mike frowned. You're sure about that? John turned back to face them. That's the same car I saw yesterday on the highway. It's not a coincidence. Mike's face hardened. Well, that seals it. Someone's trying to keep this quiet. John exhaled sharply, his mind racing. We need answers. If they dumped Lucy and the puppies, maybe they left something else behind. What do you mean? Sarah asked. I mean, JN said, grabbing his coat. I'm going back to where I found them, Mike. You're coming with me. The roadside was eerily quiet when John parked the truck in the exact spot where he'd found Lucy. Snow had fallen again overnight, softening the ground, but the faint signs of disturbed snow were still visible. John climbed out of the truck, his breath fogging the freezing air. Mike followed, pulling his coat tighter. Against the wind, the sun was higher now, though it did little to cut the chill or the sense of unease hanging over the empty stretch of highway. You really think there's something here? Mike asked as they stepped onto the shoulder. There's gotta be, John muttered, his eyes scanning the snow. They didn't just leave her there by accident. For several minutes, the two men searched their boots, crunching against the icy ground. Mike kicked at a patch of snow, uncovering nothing but dirt and rocks. I don't know. John feels like a dead end. John didn't answer. He was focused on an area closer to the tree line where the snow seemed more uneven. Kneeling, he brushed back the surface with his gloved hand. Something hard and metallic caught the light. "Mike!" John called out, his voice sharp. Mike hurried over as John pulled the object free. It was small and rectangular, a metal tag tarnished by the elements turning it over. John's stomach dropped when he read the words, stamped faintly across the surface property, of GP Labs. Mike cursed. Golden pause. John stared at the tag, anger rising.
In his chest like a slow fire, this proves it. Lucy came from there. They dumped her. Dumped all of them. Mike scowled, and someone's still watching that black car. Whoever's in it, they don't want this getting out. John pocketed the tag, his jaw tight. Well, it's too late for that. He stood looking back at the highway. "I'm not letting them get away with this." Mike nodded slowly, his expression grim. "So what now?" John glanced toward his truck where Lucy waited in the cab. The cold wind howled through the empty stretch of road, carrying with it the weight of unfinished business. "Now, John," said his voice hard, "we find out who's behind this and we stop them." The two men walked back to the truck, their boots leaving tracks in the snow. Behind them, the roadside stretched silent and empty, hiding secrets buried just beneath the surface. The engine of John's red Peterbilt truck hummed steadily as it barreled down the empty stretch of road. Snow had started falling again, a quiet dusting that turned the highway into a slippery silver ribbon. Mike sat stiffly in the passenger seat, his arms crossed over his chest, watching the snowflakes blur past the windshield. "You think that tag's enough?" Mike asked, his voice cutting through the low growl of the engine. John glanced at him briefly, his jaw set in stone. "It's a start." The metal tag labeled "Property of GP Labs" sat securely in John's jacket pocket. It wasn't much, but it was evidence proof that Lucy and her puppies had come from Golden Paws Labs. The weight of the tag pressed against him like a reminder that this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Mike shifted uncomfortably. "You really think the cops will take this seriously? They better." JN muttered, tightening his grip on the steering wheel. "Someone needs to." The two men drove in. Silence, the sound of the heater working overtime to fight off the cold. The plan was simple: get back to town and hand the tag over to the police. Let them take it from there. But simple plans never seemed to stay simple. They were halfway back to town. When it happened, John noticed the black car in his rearview mirror. First, it started as a distant shadow against the snow-covered road, but the longer he watched, the closer it crept, its sleek body unmistakable. "Mike," John said, his voice low. Mike turned his head. "What is it?" "Look behind us." Mike twisted in his seat, his face hardening. "Hell, it's them again, isn't it?" John didn't answer. He kept his eyes on the road, his muscles tense. As the black car closed the distance, the truck cab felt too small, the tension pressing in like a vice. The black car suddenly accelerated, its engine roaring as it pulled up alongside them. For a moment, John thought it would just pass by. Then the driver jerked the wheel, SW swing dangerously close to the truck. "What the hell?" Mike shouted, grabbing the dashboard. John grunted, wrenching the wheel to keep the truck steady. The car
swerved again this time, forcing John to slow down. "They're trying to stop us," John said through gritted teeth. "Yeah, well, they're doing a damn good job," Mike growled. The road narrowed ahead, a line of bare trees on either side. John eased his foot off the gas, the truck SL, blowing to a crawl as the black car cut in front of them, skidding to a halt. The driver's door opened, and a man stepped out. John's stomach turned. The man was tall, dressed in a black overcoat with dark sunglasses perched on his nose. Despite the low light, he looked clean-cut, too clean, and carried himself with the deliberate confidence of someone used to being obeyed. He stopped a few feet in front of the truck, standing still in the falling snow, his hands stuffed casually in his pockets. "What do we do?" Mike asked, his voice tight. John stared at the man for a long moment before he sighed and killed the engine. "We see what he wants. You sure that's a good idea?" "No." JN climbed out of the truck, the cold slapping him hard as he stepped onto the icy road. Mike followed reluctantly, his hands bowled into fists. The man in the black coat smiled faint as John approached. It wasn't a friendly smile, it was the kind of smile that sent shivers down your spine, Mr. Miller. "Is it the man?" said his voice, smooth and practiced, like he'd rehearsed this conversation 1,000 times. John didn't respond. He stood tall, his face hard. The man tilted his head slightly as if studying him. "I hear you've been busy sticking your nose where it doesn't belong." John's fists tightened at his sides. "You dump dogs in the snow and expect nobody to care." The man's smile didn't waver. "You've got a big heart, Mr. Miller, but big hearts can cause big problems for you. What do you want?" John demanded. The man's sunglasses reflected John's face as he spoke, his tone turning colder. "I want you to forget about what you found. Forget the dogs, forget the tag, forget Golden Paws." John's heart pounded, but his voice stayed steady. "Not going to happen." The man's smile faded. "That would be unfortunate." He took a step closer, his coat flapping in the wind. "For you and for your friends." Mike stepped forward, his voice sharp. "Is that a threat?" The man didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a business card, holding it out to John. "Think carefully." The man said, "Sometimes it's better to let things lie." John stared at the card for a moment before snatching it from the man's hand. The man gave him one final smile, cold and empty, before turning back toward the black car. He climbed inside, and the vehicle pulled away, tires skidding on the icy road, before disappearing into the trees. John looked down at the card in his hand. It was blank, except for a phone number printed in black ink. Mike exhaled sharply, his breath misting in the cold. Who the hell was that trouble? John muttered, crumpling the card in his fist. By the time they reached the police station, in town, the sun was dipping behind the grey clouds, casting long shadows over the snow-covered street. The station was small, with only a few squad cars parked outside. Inside, the air smelled of stale coffee and old wood, and the hum of a space heater buzzed faintly in the background. Detective Roberts was a tall, broad-shouldered man in his 50s, with thinning grey hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. He sat across from John and Mike in a small windowless room, the metal tag resting on the table between them. "Golden Paw Labs," Roberts murmured. Reading the faint inscription, he looked up at John. "Where did you find this by the roadside?" John replied, "Near where I found the mother dog and her puppies." Roberts leaned back in his chair, his expression darkening. "We've been hearing whispers about Golden Paws for months. Illegal breeding, genetic tampering, nasty stuff. But we haven't been able to pin anything on them. They're careful, real careful. Well, they're not careful enough." John said Lucy and her pups came from that place. "And someone doesn't want us digging deeper. A man in a black car intercepted us on the road, told me to back off." Robert's brow furrowed. "You get a name?" John shook his head. "No, just a card with a number." He handed it over. Roberts took it, inspecting it with a grimace. This just got a lot bigger. He stood, slipping the card and tag into an evidence bag. "We'll start the investigation immediately, and I'll warn you now, if Golden Paws is still active, they won't go down quietly. You might want to watch your back." John met his gaze, unflinching. "I'm not backing down," Roberts nodded. "Good, because this tag might just blow the lid off the whole thing." As John and Mike left the station, snow began falling again, light and steady. John shoved his hands into his pockets as they walked back to the truck, his mind heavy with everything that had happened. "They won't stop, will they?" Mike asked quietly. "No," John replied, looking up at the grey sky, "but neither will we." Lucy sat waiting in the cab, her eyes calm but watchful, as though she understood that something bigger was happening. JN opened the door and climbed inside, his resolve hardening like the ice on the road, whoever was behind. Whisper. They shut 'em down. Outside, the familiar rumble of John's truck echoed through the lot as he pulled up. When he stepped inside, the small bell above the door jingled, and all eyes turned toward him. In his arms, wrapped securely in a blanket, Ben poked his tiny head out, letting out a faint, squeaky bark. Sarah smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. "He made it, yeah," John said softly, glancing down at the pup. "He made it." Mike grunted, his face breaking into a rare smile. "Tough little guy, just like his owner." John gave a small shake of his head, but he couldn't stop the smile tugging at his lips. "I'm not his owner. I'm just someone who didn't look the other way," maybe Sarah said. "But it's because of you that this is over. Those people are going to pay for what they did." John's expression darkened slightly. He thought of the black car, the man in the coat, the threats. He'd been warned to stop digging, but he hadn't. He couldn't. "This isn't about me," John said, finally, looking down at Lucy, who was sitting patiently at his feet. "It's about them. They deserve a second chance." That evening, John stood in front of his small, single-story home. At the edge of town, the snow-covered yard looked emptier than ever as he opened the door, carrying Ben in one arm, while Lucy followed close behind her, 3 other pups waddling clumsily after her. Inside the house felt too quiet too, still for years. This place had been empty. No voices, no life, just the distant echo of Catherine's laughter that still lingered in his mind. But as Lucy curled up by the fireplace with her puppies tucked around her, JN realized the silence wasn't so heavy anymore. He gently set Ben down beside his siblings, where he nestled into the warmth of his family. John watched for a long moment, his chest tight. "You've got a home now," he murmured, more to himself than to them. Lucy lifted her head, her deep brown eyes meeting his. There was no fear in them now, only gratitude. John stepped back and sank into his old recliner, the springs groaning beneath his weight. He looked at the worn photo of Catherine on the mantel and smiled faintly. "You were right," he said softly. "Sometimes angels appear in the most unexpected places." The days that followed were brighter news of the Golden Paw raid spread quickly, and John's role in exposing the operation became a quiet topic of admiration around town. People stopped him on the street to thank him, though he never took credit for it. He said it was the dogs who'd saved themselves. Ben grew stronger with each passing day, though he remained smaller than his siblings. He was feisty and determined, chasing his brothers and sisters across John's living room as though the cold days in the snow had never happened. Mike stopped by regularly, often with an armful of supplies, dog food, blankets and toys. He claimed he just happened to have lying around. Sarah brought over treats and fresh-baked pies, fussing over Lucy and her pups like they were her own. And John, for the first time in years, he didn't feel alone one evening as the sun dipped behind the horizon. John stood on the porch, a steaming mug of coffee in his hand. Lucy sat beside him, her gaze fixed on the yard where her pups tumbled over each other in a clumsy game of tag. "You did, good girl," John said, reaching down to scratch behind her ears. "You kept them safe and they're going to be all right." Lucy let out a soft huff, as if agreeing with him. John smiled as he watched Ben pounce on one of his siblings, his tiny tail wagging furiously. That little pup had been on the brink of death, but now he was alive, truly alive. Catherine's words echoed once more in his mind, this time not as a memory but as a truth. He could finally believe sometimes angels appear in the most unexpected places. John took a deep breath, the cold air filling his lungs, and for the first time in years, he felt like he'd finally found his way home. The seasons had shifted, trading icy winds for the gentle warmth of spring. John Miller's house, once a place of silence and shadows, now overflowed with life. The front yard, once an empty expanse of snow, was alive with the sounds of barking puppies and the laughter of visitors. Lucy lay lazily on the porch, her golden fur shining under the sun's golden rays. Her pups, now sturdy, playful bundles of energy, chased one another across the grass, tumbling and yipping with joyful abandon. Even Ben, the smallest of the litter, ran at the front of the pack, his little legs stronger than ever. JN sat in his old rocking chair, a mug of coffee in hand and a faint smile on his face. The creak of the chair blended with the sounds of his new family. He watched Ben leap clumsily onto his bigger brother, his tiny tail wagging with all the might his small frame could manage. Mike leaned against the porch railing, shaking his head with a laugh. I never pegged you as the dog dad type. John snorted softly. Yeah, well, neither did I nearby. Sarah knelt on the grass, tossing a toy for the puppies. Her short chestnut hair was caught in the breeze, and her voice rang out with the kind of joy John hadn't heard in years. They're growing so fast, you're going to have a full house for a while. John JN glanced at the house behind him, once quiet and empty, now filled with life toys, were scattered across the living room. A dog bed sat in the corner, and the faint smell of puppy kibble lingered in the air. But it didn't bother him. It felt right. It felt like home. He took a sip of his coffee and let his gaze drift to the sky, clear and blue, with only a few wisps of white clouds. For the first time since Catherine passed, he felt her presence warm and constant. Her words echoed softly in his mind. Sometimes angels appear in the most unexpected places. John exhaled deeply, his smile growing. The sun dipped lower on the horizon as the day stretched lazily toward evening. Sarah and Mike lingered, sharing stories and laughing, while the puppies, finally tired, curled up at Lucy's side on the porch. Ben nestled close to her, his small body rising and falling in peaceful sleep. "You ever think," Mike asked, breaking the quiet, "that all of this happened for a reason?" John glanced at him, his brow furrowing slightly. Mike shrugged, his rough voice softer than usual. "I mean, you could have kept driving that day, most people would have, but you stopped. Maybe something wanted you to." John didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked out over the yard, his heart full, in a way it hadn't been for years. Catherine used to say, "God puts angels in our path when we least expect them," John said finally. "I used to think she was just being poetic, but now," he gestured toward Lucy and her puppies, "now I think she was right." Sarah smiled, her eyes glistening slightly. Maybe this was always meant to happen. "John, maybe this family was waiting for you." Junk's voice was quiet but firm. "I think we were waiting for each other that night," as the house settled into a peaceful quiet. John sat on the porch, alone. The puppies were curled up in their beds, and Lucy lay on the rug beside them, her ears twitching in her sleep. The air was cool, filled with the faint hum of crickets and the rustle of leaves. John leaned back in his chair, looking up at the darkened sky filled with stars. His thoughts drifted to Catherine, to her voice, to the memory of her laughter that once filled this house. "I hope you're smiling," he murmured softly, as though speaking to her through the heavens. "You were right all along." A faint breeze whispered past him, carrying with it a feeling of peace, of blessing. He thought of all the moments where he could have walked away, could have chosen the easy path, but didn't, because life had taught him something important. Sometimes the hardest decisions were the ones that mattered most, and sometimes angels really did appear in the most unexpected places. John clasped his hands together, bowing his head for a brief, quiet prayer of gratitude. He wasn't one to pray often, but tonight he did. "Thank you for guiding me, for showing me this path, and for bringing them home." When he opened his eyes, the house behind him glowed faintly with warmth, the light spilling from the windows like a promise. It wasn't empty anymore. As he rocked gently in his chair, a soft smile spread across his face. The story of Lucy and her puppies wasn't just about saving lives, it was about hope, redemption, and faith. It was a reminder that even in our darkest moments, light can appear if we're willing to see it. John had once been a man who thought his life was over, a man who believed his best days were behind him. But Lucy then, and the other puppies, proved that life always has more to give if we keep our hearts open to those watching. John Miller's story offered a simple truth. Sometimes angels appear in the most unexpected places. If you've ever been blessed by an animal's love, if you've ever experienced a second chance, or if you believe that hope can change lives, share this story with someone who needs it. Because sometimes we all need a reminder that miracles can happen. And maybe, just maybe, you'll find an angel of your own